In this episode of Cannabis Unlocked, Hugo Alves, co-founder and CEO of Auxly Cannabis, joins Key Investment Partners founding partner, myself, Tiby Erdely, for a conversation about building one of Canada's most successful cannabis companies. Hugo shares his path from McDonald's employee to senior partner at Bennett Jones before taking the leap in 2017 to build Oxley. From there, we explore the company's evolution into a vertically integrated cannabis leader, headlined by the success of their flagship brand, Back 40. Next, Hugo and I dig into the difference makers for Oxley, including early bets on fast-moving, growing product categories, and how the company's recent financing is paving their long-term path for growth and profitability. To close out, Hugo shares his mission to help people live happier lives through fun, accessible, high-quality products, and why he sees Back 40 becoming a global cannabis staple over the next 5 years. I hope you enjoy the episode.
All right, everybody. Well, welcome to another episode of Cannabis Unlocked. I'm excited to be here with Hugo Alves today, the CEO of Auxly Cannabis in Canada. It's not often that we have Canadian operators on the show, so I'm really excited to be talking with Hugo today. Full disclosure, while Key is not an investor, I am a shareholder in the company, nothing material, but thought it makes sense to put that out there as we get started on the podcast here. The podcast today is going to be really an opportunity to get to know Hugo, the company, how he got involved in cannabis in the first place. I think we're going to have a lot of fun with this. So Hugo, really appreciate you joining us today. Let's start with a little bit about yourself and your background. Would love to know, who you are, where you grew up. Had you ever imagined running a company? Kind of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, Tiby, thank you for having me on the show, and thank you for being a shareholder and supporting Oxley. Always much appreciated. My name's Hugo Alves. I'm one of the co-founders of Oxley. I was its inaugural president, and I became CEO in August of 2019, so coming up on 6 years now. Before that, I was a lawyer at Bennett Jones here in Toronto, a big national law firm in Canada, where I was a senior partner in their commercial group, and I built their cannabis law practice. And yeah, look, I think in terms, you asked me kind of where I grew up, and I had a pretty normal, I think, upbringing. I did well in school, played a lot of sports, had lots of friends. It was generally good times. But I did grow up in the East End of Hamilton, Ontario. So you had to be street smart, and people were generally like, they hustled. So from a very young age, I don't know if I ever dreamed of running a company, but I was always very interested in kind of working and making a dollar. So I think from that perspective, where I grew up, definitely had an impact in my professional life.
Love it. I can definitely attest to the hustler mindset. Probably something that we both share in our blood here. You mentioned that you ran the cannabis practice. What years was that from?
It was right from kind of 23 till or 2013 till we left in 2017 to run Oxley. The government of Canada had kind of published rules on the new legal production and distribution of medical cannabis. And like I said, I was a lawyer back then at a large national law firm. But I saw an opportunity to sort of build a practice around cannabis regulation. And so together with actually one of Auxley's co-founders and current president, Mike Lickfer, who was practicing with me at Bennett Jones, that's exactly what we did. We built the #1 cannabis practice in Canada. And then later with Oxley, we really saw an opportunity to build kind of like a unique business in an industry that we loved. So we made a very difficult decision to leave, very successful legal practices to start Oxley. And I think kind of, what unified both the legal practice at Oxley plus jumping into industry, I think, was really our love for the plant, which, that did evolve over a long period of time. Cannabis has played an ongoing part in my entire adult life, and my experience with it has been overwhelmingly positive. And I think, that was a lot of the driving force between taking the risk to build a legal practice, because it's like any other business, and you're accountable for it at the law firm, and then the transition to Oxley was really the opportunity to combine my professional pursuits with something I was personally very passionate about. So and it's been a wild and exciting ride ever since. I've learned a ton and don't regret a minute of it.
Yeah. Would you say that a younger version of you would have ever imagined you'd end up running a company like this?
Like I said, I don't know if I imagined running a company, but I was always from a very young age, like very engaged in some whatever commerce I could muster, right? Everything from gathering the sort of neighborhood crew to go and shovel driveways after a big snowfall to writing term papers in university and like everything in between. I think I was usually the guy in the group that had like the plan, right? Like it was usually for shenanigans, usually for, non-productive things. Like, how do we get to the party tonight? How do we procure weed for the party? I was that guy. So, you know,
So it sounds like you really kind of had a ton of different jobs, maybe even a jack of all trades from a young age. Would you say that there's anything from your more formative years that um, taught you something that really still sticks to how you run your business or your, I say, moral compass today?
yeah, like, I mean, that's a great question. Like I said, I started working real early, like mowing lawns, picking fruit. I guess, my first corporate job was McDonald's. Shout out to Mickey D's, still my favorite
Cool.
hamburger.
Wow.
And I worked there for like one glorious summer right after I turned 16. I think it was like summer of 88 or something like that. And, in a funny twist, the McDonald's that I worked at, which is in Stadium Mall in Hamilton, is now a Value Buds, which is one of the largest cannabis retailers in Canada. So it come full circle.
Wow.
And I think, what that job taught me really was, that the teams are a lot more fun and productive than individuals, right? It was always so much more productive and fun when we had a strong crew on a shift. Everyone was chatting and talking, everyone's engaged, pulling their weight. And it would definitely not like that if we had you know maybe some people on the shift that weren't as engaged, right? I guess I learned, like, no matter how good you are on the grill, if the guy who is dressing the buns is messing it up, like, it's gonna be an L for the whole team. The customer's not
Yeah.
going to be happy. So that focus is really translated, at Auxly. We are very, very much team focused, team driven. Everything's about the team here.
I appreciate that response there. I can certainly say, as an investor in the industry, focusing on the right management teams that have the right support behind them has been really critical to the success of our investments. So I can definitely relate to your on the ground experience there. You talked a little bit about kind of how you got involved with the cannabis space, from your early formative years procuring marijuana for parties or building out the practice at the law firm. But I guess ultimately, what really pulled you into the cannabis industry? Were you, a 13-year-old saying, "I'm going to work in the cannabis industry one day," or were it just more of a matter of opportunity and chance and you at the place at the right time?
Yeah, look, I think, like I said, I loved being a lawyer. I really enjoyed that profession. I've worked with just great, smart people across the board and fantastic clients. So I wasn't looking to leave, but I have always been passionate about cannabis my entire adult life, and I was having a lot of success building the cannabis practice. And I think when I started being offered opportunities to maybe join industry, I had to think about it for a long time, and I had to talk about it with my family because they would be impacted. But it ultimately came down to thinking, if I have a great reputation in the industry, I have a very strong network. I love the subject matter more than I've ever liked any professional subject matter before. So, and I was being offered, fantastic opportunities. So I thought, if I'm not willing to leave and take a risk to do something that I genuinely want to do under these circumstances, then what circumstances have to exist for me to take the risk? And, the conclusion, at least that I reached, was, if you're not willing to take the risk under these circumstances, you're never taking the risk. And I wanted to take the risk. I wanted to have the experience. I didn't want to live with the regret.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I appreciate that. So definitely feel like I've got a good feel for who you are, how you got to where you are today. Just kind of switching gears a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about Oxley? Tell us, who you guys are, what you do, where you sell your product, et cetera. What
Yeah,
you're most
for sure.
proud of the company.
Well, that would take a while. But look, we're a Canadian vertically integrated cannabis company. We specialize in the cultivation, manufacturing, sales, and marketing of dried flower, pre-rolls, and vapes. We grow and make our own products, and we sell them under our own brands, including Collab Project, Foray, and our cornerstone brand, Back 40, which is Canada's #1 cannabis brand by dollars sold.
Wow.
And we have world-class assets that really give us the scale, quality, and flexibility to support our growth. That includes a 50,000 square foot product innovation and vape manufacturing facility in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, and a 1.1 million square foot cannabis cultivation and pre-roll facility in Leamington, Ontario. And look, it's an exciting time to be an Auxly shareholder, to be an Auxly stakeholder. I don't have one moment that I'm most proud of. I think achieving sustainable profitability, is a milestone that I think every entrepreneur, every company strives for. Very few achieve it, and we have achieved it. We've done it with, I think, the longest tenured management team in the industry. All of us are founders except one guy, and he's been with us 8 years, so almost from the beginning. So we've had to navigate a lot of industry headwinds, a lot of choppy waters. So to be able to navigate those waters and build something that is genuinely going to last, and to see your brands and products being loved by consumers is obviously very proud.
Yeah, that's really incredible, especially in such a competitive market like the Canadian market. You I think you kind of already answered this question, but just to get a little bit more targeted, outside of the team that you've been able to assemble, your commitment to excellence, what is it that you really think sets Auxly apart from the rest of the competition in the Canadian market?
Yeah, great question. Great question. The Canadian market itself, is an exciting market to be in, right? Like it's a growing market, it's a maturing market. It's projected to grow to $7.4 billion by 2030 at a 5% CAGR per year. But we're seeing a lot greater stability in terms of pricing, especially in the flower segment, where we've seen some tailwinds in pricing. We've also, kind of driven by a shortage of high quality supply to meet both domestic and international markets, which are also growing. So, we really like the Canadian market. It demands at an all-time high and growing, more stable, and pricing is improving. So, we're excited about the Canadian market, and I think we are very excited about our future because we think we are differentiated and we are succeeding in this highly competitive Canadian market. And in terms of what sets us apart, I think, first, we focused on the fastest growing and largest product categories: dried flower, pre-rolls, and vapes. That's 87% of total market in Canada. So we pour all of our energy into those categories, and we've gotten very good at understanding those consumers and innovating in those categories to sort of meet their evolving needs. And because of that, we have brands and products that people trust and love. And I'm using the term people very purposefully. We've already already mentioned Back 40 is Canada's #1 cannabis brand by dollars sold. Building that sort of trust, it takes time, it takes commitment, it takes consistency, because it's not just building it with consumers, but also with your customers and our retail partners, right? They have to know and trust that you can consistently deliver high quality product, and we've proven that we can do that. We've proven that we can execute with excellence and consistently deliver great products. And we're growing, and not just growing, we're growing profitably, which you can't say about very many other cannabis companies. We're currently the third largest licensed producer by market share in Canada, 6.2% of total market. We're one of the fastest growing licensed producers in the country. At the till sales are up 34% on a rolling 12 months. Back 40 itself is one of the fastest growing brands nationally. At the till sales for Back 40 are up 50% on a rolling 12. And we've had consistent year-over-year revenue and EBITDA growth since we started operations. Most recently, our Q1 financials, Q1 2025 financials, net revenue grew to an all-time Q1 high of 32.7 million, which was a 29% year-over-year increase compared to Q1 24. So we're growing, but it's the profitability, I think, that really sets us apart, right? Like in Q1, our recently reported results, adjusted EBITDA grew to 7.4 million dollars for the quarter. That was a more than 200% year-over-year increase. And our run rate financial data, our gross margins consistently in the 45 to 50% range. We've delivered 7 consecutive quarters of positive adjusted EBITDA with trailing 12 months adjusted EBITDA of 32 million dollars, and positive cash flow from operations for 4 consecutive quarters with trailing 12 months CFO of 21 million dollars. So we are growing profitably, and we own world-class assets that I've already discussed, that give us that sort of scale, flexibility, ability to meet growing demand, but protecting profitability. And now I think we just announced today that we've closed a major refinancing, which completely transforms our balance sheet. And so I think now with that refinancing, we also have the financial flexibility to continue growing, right? This refinancing significantly strengthens our balance sheet. It lowers our debt costs by $700,000 annually. It gives us longer debt runway by extending our term by up to 3 years. And it removed $21 million of debt from our balance sheet entirely through the debt for equity swap with our strategic partner, Imperial Brands. And then on top of all that good stuff, we secured an additional $10 million in a committed revolving credit facility to help us fund that future growth. So we're super excited about Auxly. We believe we focused on the right product formats, the right assets, and that we have the right team to continue delivering strong, profitable results as we move forward.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Hugo. I really appreciate you diving right into the details there. You kind of took some questions out of my mouth, so I appreciate you getting ahead of it. I think there's no doubt that there's a ton of value in your stock, and frankly, in a market that's been largely overlooked. The Canadian cannabis market or the U.S. cannabis markets, it's been quite painful over the past couple of years, and I think that a lot of investors are looking for unlocking value elsewhere. Although from what I've seen, not only with you, but even some of the other players in Canada, it seems that there's a massive turnaround happening in Canada. I'd say probably a year or a couple years ahead of where the US market is today. And I certainly would encourage investors to do their homework and look for opportunities like companies like Auxly, because you guys are certainly have your heads down, you're blocking and tackling, I wouldn't say that you're focused on just your share price or quarterly results, although that is very important to you. You're focused on growing a real business and doing things the right way. And I think just that announcement that you mentioned today of the the debt reduction strategy, et cetera, it's ripping in the stock price today. You see it moving. So it's really incredible what you guys have been able to accomplish in what I would say is, in hindsight, a relatively short amount of time in what has been a largely difficult environment.
Yep,
Your
thank you.
mission, of course, your mission is about helping people live happier lives. Tell me a little bit about what that means to you in practice.
Yeah, great question. I'm going to make one small correction though, Tiby. Our mission is to help people live happier lives through quality cannabis products that they trust and love. And I think, the full mission maybe helps tell like a fuller story, right? Like, I think first and foremost, we believe cannabis can help people live happier lives, right? Whether that's for medicinal purposes or recreational purposes. We genuinely believe in the fun, uplifting benefits of cannabis. So we want our products to likewise be fun, not too complicated, not too serious, accessible, easy. And we're obsessed with quality, right? From product quality to customer service, we want to make sure that the consumer and the customer are never disappointed, right? Even more important in today's, ever more expensive world, right? Where people have to make real decisions with their consumer dollars. So we always want to ensure that we're always high quality, that we're always meeting or exceeding the consumer's expectation, that their experience is always excellent. So, we always want to ensure that we consistently deliver high quality products that are effective. And we believe that's the cornerstone of consumer trust and love, that the product's always on point and that they can always rely on it to have a great time.
I
So that's
appreciate
what it,
that.
yeah.
That's really great. Hopefully we have an opportunity to chat more between now and this next question, but 5 years from now, when we're on another podcast, what would be a milestone that you would hope to have achieved between now and then? Tell me a little bit about your vision of the future here.
5 years?
Sure.
5 years. Yeah, it's not a long time. Like, I know in cannabis we sometimes feel like we're living dog years, but in absolute terms, like it's not a ton of time. I honestly, like, I hope in 5 years that we're celebrating some of the same things we're talking about today. Like, I hope we're still celebrating the Back 40 remains the number one cannabis brand in Canada, that, our brands and products continue to be loved by consumers, and that we're continuing to grow and profitably, just with, much bigger profits. I guess if there's a dream, right, to be like, in terms of something to really, really celebrate, it might be, Back 40 not only being the number one brand in Canada, but also a leading brand in another part of the world, right? That would be awesome to see Back 40 products on shelves in other parts of the world, to see consumers in other countries enjoying the product. Who knows? Maybe one day, Back 40 sponsors the World Cup or sponsors the Olympics. It's like, that would be massive. It'd be huge. But, dreams are supposed to be huge.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Well, 5 years from now, like you said, it'll be here faster than we know it. So
Yeah, that's right.
I hope to see the sponsorship then. I hope to get up to Canada soon to try the Back 40 product myself. Hugo, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. I like to keep these things short, sweet, and to the point. Is there anything, that you'd like to leave the audience with today as we wrap things up?
Look, thank you, first of all, for having me on. I'd happy to come back and update you on Oxley anytime. Look, I think to leave your audience, I would just repeat, like, we're super excited about the future. We think it's a great time to be an Oxley stakeholder. We're growing, we're profitable. We have the brands and products people trust and love. We have world-class assets to support our continued growth. And now with this refinancing, we got the financial flexibility to continue growing. So again, excited about the future. You'll hear me say it a lot. We're just getting started.
Yeah, I'm equally as excited for you guys, and wish you the best of luck as not only a big fan of what you're doing, but as a shareholder as well. So Hugo, I appreciate all the hard work, and I thank you for your time today. Thanks everybody for joining the podcast here today. Cheers.
Cheers.